10%. That was all I asked for, and somehow it turned into a punchline. I still remember the sound of Hudson's laugh bouncing off the glass walls of his corner office. It wasn't a chuckle or a polite smile. It was the full-body kind of laugh a man has when he thinks he's just heard something ridiculous. He leaned back in that ridiculously expensive leather chair, wiped at the corner of his eye, and asked me if I was serious, like I just suggested we build rocket ships in the loading bay. I was standing there with a folder in my hand, every page stacked with proof that I wasn't crazy. 18 years of process improvements. Charts that showed defect rates crashing. Graphs of overtime and workers' comp claims going down because we stopped breaking people's backs on the line. I had it all highlighted, tabbed, neat. Old Navy habits die hard. He finally calmed down and said, almost amused, that I really wanted a 10% raise after 18 years. I told him that, based on what I'd delivered, it was more than fair. I reminded him that the lean system I'd rolled out had shaved millions off our costs just last quarter, and that the new safety modifications had taken our injury count to 0. He waved his hand like he was brushing away a mosquito and said something about everyone being replaceable, even me, and that if I thought I was worth more, the market was open. I've been shot at in the middle of the ocean and stuck in engine rooms where the air tasted like burnt oil and metal dust, but that moment still ranks high on my personal list of things that made my blood go cold. It wasn't just the refusal. It was how easy it was for him to say I didn't matter. For context, my name is Calvin Bennett. Most people around the plant just call me Cal. I'm 49, ex-Navy technician, now senior manufacturing systems engineer at a place called Porter Manufacturing Group. Translation: I'm the guy who makes sure the machines, people, and materials dance in the right order so parts come out on time and in one piece. I'm not flashy. My shoulders are broad from years of leaning over machines and crawling under conveyor systems, not from some fitness influencer program. My back's a little stiff and the gray on my temples shows up real harsh under fluorescent lights, but I still move like somebody who expects heavy equipment to go wrong at any second. When I got out of the service at 31, Porter felt like a second chance. A place where the precision and discipline I'd learned on a carrier meant something. I started on the floor, sleeves rolled up, hands in the grease. Over the years, I worked my way into systems design, one workflow at a time. I built the kind of processes where you can walk a line, listen to the rhythm, and know nothing's about to explode. A few months before that meeting with Hudson, we'd had a close call on the Eastwood line. One of the older guys, Dale, tried to muscle a 50-pound component off a rack the way he'd been doing for years. His foot slipped on a patch of coolant, and for a second the whole part hung over his head. If Tommy hadn't been right there to grab the edge, we would have been filing accident reports and calling Dale's wife from the ER. That night, I went home and reworked the layout and assist systems until 3 in the morning. 2 weeks later, we had pneumatic lifts in place. Dale didn't have to gamble his spine to hit quota anymore. I mentioned that in my presentation to Hudson, too. The incident, the redesign, the fact that we hadn't had a single injury on that station since. He nodded once and said safety was nice, but what really mattered was cost. I told him the redesign boosted output 30+%. That should have been the magic number. Instead, he repeated that line, "Everyone's replaceable," and looked at his screen like the conversation was over. I remember forcing myself to exhale slowly, closing the folder so he wouldn't see my hands shaking. I told him I appreciated his time, thanked him for the clarity, and walked out before I said something that would get me escorted to the parking lot. On the way back to my side of the building, I walked past the row of glass offices where managers half my age sat in ergonomic chairs, talking about alignment and synergies on video calls. I knew what most of them made. I knew how long they'd been there. Most of them couldn't tell a hydraulic leak from a coffee spill, but they had titles and clean shirts, so the company treated them like assets. My workspace was in the far corner of the engineering bay. Nothing fancy. A big L-shaped desk I'd bolted together myself so it wouldn't wobble when I spread out blueprints, a couple of monitors, a battered steel tool chest I refused to give up, and a view straight down onto the factory floor. Not the skyline Hudson had, but I preferred the sight of forklifts moving and press lines breathing in rhythm. When I sat down, the company intranet was still open on my screen, showing the latest CEO message about Porter's revolutionary manufacturing transformation. There was a glossy photo of Hudson shaking hands with one of Eastwood's executives next to a caption about his vision, reshaping our production philosophy. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was any engineers. The article read like the machines had rearranged themselves overnight because a guy in a tailored suit told them to. That was when something inside me clicked from hurt to cold. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old leather notebook. It was dark brown, cracked at the spine, edges worn from being shoved into tool bags and laptop sleeves for nearly 2 decades. Every big idea I've had started in that thing. Blocky handwriting, dates pressed hard into the paper, little sketches of potential layouts, lists of tests I ran at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Near the middle, there was a section I knew by heart. I flipped straight to it. At the top of the page, in my own handwriting, I'd written a title years ago, Precision Flow Optimization, Personal Project, Developed Off-Site. Underneath were timestamps from weekends at my kitchen table, notes about simulation runs on my own laptop, not the company's workstation. Diagrams of material routes, calculations of cycle times, ergonomic notes I'd scribbled after watching guys like Tommy limp off shift. Those sketches, with some cleanup and implementation work, had become the backbone of Porter's current manufacturing system. I turned pages. More of the same. Projects I'd started on my own time because I couldn't stand watching people get hurt or watching money burn for no reason. When I brought those ideas in, I'd always sent emails, polite, formal notes offering to present the concept and, if they wanted to keep it, to draw up an agreement about ownership and compensation. I remembered Hudson's replies, "Just do it if it works. We'll figure out the paperwork later." Later never came. For years, I told myself that was fine. That the raise, the title, the recognition would show up when the numbers spoke loud enough. Standing there with that notebook open, the ink slightly smudged on dates from 4, 5, 8 years back, I realized the numbers had been screaming for a while. Hudson just chose not to listen. My phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Tommy. A picture of the Eastwood line, everything green on the dashboard, and a caption saying the new assists were saving his back. I stared at that photo for a long second. Those guys weren't just employees to me. They were the people who had trusted me when I asked them to try a new sequence or a different way of lifting. They were the ones who'd stayed late when I begged for an extra hour of testing. And upstairs, the man who put his name on my work thought 10% was a joke. I opened my email and scrolled way down to an old connection I'd never used. Her name was Diana Walsh, VP of Operations at Velocity Industrial, our main rival. We'd crossed paths at conferences, talked shop over lukewarm coffee in hotel ballrooms. She had this way of asking about failure modes and line balancing that told me she actually understood the nuts and bolts, not just the buzzwords. The last message from her was 4 months old. She'd written that if I ever felt like my work wasn't being valued where I was, Velocity would be very interested in talking. At the time, I'd archived it. Loyalty, I told myself. Porter took you in when you were fresh out of the Navy. You don't just bail because you're tired. Now, with Hudson's laughter still echoing in my skull and my own handwriting staring up from that notebook, the word loyalty tasted different. Loyalty to what exactly? To a logo? To a man who would throw me under a bus to gain half a point on a quarterly report. My thumb hovered over the call button on her contact. 18 years is a long time to spend under one roof. I could see my first day like it happened last week. Me in a cheap button-down shirt that didn't quite fit right, walking nervous past the stamping presses, smelling hot metal and coolant, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, somebody would notice. I thought about the first time I stayed until sunrise with a team of operators because a new setup kept crashing, and how we all cheered like kids when it finally ran clean. I thought about the guys who had retired from Porter with a handshake and a watch, and the ones who left quietly when their bodies gave out. Then I thought about Hudson's grin. My finger pressed the screen before I finished the thought. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then I heard her voice. Sharp, confident, like someone in control of her own schedule. She answered using her full name and title. I introduced myself and said I was finally ready to have that conversation she'd mentioned. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She told me she'd been wondering how long it would take before I got tired of watching someone else stand in front of my work for photo ops. She asked if I could meet for dinner that night. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. When I hung up, I sat there in the quiet hum of the engineering bay, just listening. Through the glass, the factory floor looked like it always did. Yellow lines on concrete, forklifts weaving, stacks of parts waiting their turn in the process. But something in the way I watched it had changed. This wasn't just my plant anymore, a place I owed my loyalty to at all costs. It was a machine I had helped build for someone who thought the builder didn't matter. I slid the leather notebook into my bag, along with a small stack of printouts I'd been updating over the past year: process maps, safety reports, efficiency graphs, each stamped with dates and notes about where the work actually started. For the first time, I looked at that pile not as side projects I'd given away for free, but as evidence of something I might need to defend. By the time quitting time rolled around, I had made myself one quiet promise. If this place ever forced me to choose between my dignity and my job, I wasn't going to pick the job again. I just didn't realize that choice had already been made for me. In a corner office with a laugh and a wave of the hand, I showed up to Richardson's Steakhouse that night wearing the best shirt I owned, which, to be honest, still had a faint stain from a hydraulic fluid mishap years ago. I tried covering it with my jacket and hoped the lighting would be dim enough that no one would notice. The place wasn't my style. Dark wood, white tablecloths, waiters who spoke in low voices, a wine list longer than our entire plant safety manual. But Diana sat there like she'd been born in a room like this, calm, poised, perfectly at ease. She stood when I approached and said she was glad I called. I told her I wasn't sure glad was the right word for me yet, but I was there because something needed to change. She nodded like she already knew that part. Once we sat down, she didn't waste time with small talk. She asked about the Eastwood contract, how Porter had increased throughput so quickly. I told her the truth. I'd redesigned the whole workflow at home first, then brought it in piece by piece. She leaned forward a little, elbows on the table, and said she'd been certain the systems Porter used weren't in Hudson's wheelhouse. She said it in a way that wasn't insulting, just matter of fact, like an engineer diagnosing a machine that's rattling. I remember telling her that Hudson didn't even know the difference between a load cell and a limit switch. She smiled, not a big smile, more like the kind someone gives when they've been proven right about a suspicion. The waiter came by to take our orders. She ordered a steak. I ordered something cheaper because old habits die hard. When the waiter left, Diana got straight to it. She said Velocity needed someone who understood manufacturing from the ground up, someone who didn't just recite jargon but could walk a line and see where the flow broke. I told her that was flattering, but what exactly did she mean by needed? That's when she laid out the offer. Vice President of Manufacturing Systems. Not a manager. Not a senior engineer. Vice President. Double my Porter salary. Bonuses tied to real performance metrics. Profit sharing. Control of my own engineering team. And then she dropped the part one didn't realize I needed to hear until she said it. Full credit on any patentable process improvements I developed. My name. On my work. Permanently. I tried to hide it, but something inside me tightened. Recognition wasn't the thing I'd been chasing for 18 years. Not consciously, anyway. But hearing it spoken so plainly hit a nerve I didn't realize had been raw for years. I asked her how she knew the systems Porter used were mine. She said that Velocity had tried to reverse engineer the Eastwood process based on the parts and cycle times, but something about the flow logic didn't make sense. Not because it was flawed, but because it was too human. Too grounded in what actually happens on a production line instead of what looks good in a boardroom presentation. She told me she'd spent enough years on factory floors in steel-toe boots, solving real problems, not imaginary ones invented in PowerPoint. And when she watched Porter's numbers change as quickly as they did, she ruled out the idea that Hudson had designed anything. She said he was a numbers guy sitting in a chair someone else earned long before he arrived. I didn't argue. I took a sip of water because if I didn't, I was afraid I'd say yes on the spot. Diana must have noticed. She lowered her voice and asked if I was afraid of looking disloyal. I told her loyalty was something I took seriously, maybe too seriously. That Porter had been my first home out of the service. That I'd stayed 18 years not because I lacked options, but because I believed loyalty meant something. She didn't push back. She didn't tell me I owed them nothing. She just said one sentence. quiet enough that I almost missed it over the clinking silverware around us. Loyalty only works when it goes both ways, Cal. I stared at my glass after that. The light from the candle on the table reflected in the water, making it shimmer like a rippling blueprint. I thought about Hudson's laugh, about his face when he told me to test the market, about all the times I had stayed late to protect the lines and the people running them, about the email I'd sent years ago offering to transfer ownership of a process if Porter wanted to formalize things, and about the one-line reply, "Just get it done." When the food came, Diana switched gears and asked what I would do if I had unlimited resources and no one telling me, "That's not how we do things here." I didn't even have to think. I started sketching a new plant layout on the back of a receipt from my pocket. I drew stations, described predictive maintenance loops, real-time quality screens run from simple tablets instead of clunky terminals. She asked questions, not fluffy ones, real technical ones. Felt like air after years underwater. By the time the plates were cleared, I knew I was going to leave Porter. But leaving wasn't enough. I didn't want to sneak out in the middle of the night. I wanted to do this clean, professional, documented. So I told her I needed 2 weeks. She raised an eyebrow like she expected me to say I could start Monday. But she nodded and said if 2 weeks was what I needed, she could wait. I respected her more for that. On the drive home, the city lights blurred a little from behind the windshield. My truck has never been graceful. It rattles, the heater works when it wants to, and the radio flickers when I hit a pothole. But that night it felt like the whole vehicle was carrying the weight of a decision I hadn't fully spoken aloud yet. I parked outside my house and just sat for a while. The engine ticked as it cooled. The neighborhood was quiet except for a dog 2 houses down barking at nothing. And for the first time in 18 years, I felt something shift inside me. The version of me who believed patience would be rewarded. That version was slipping. And the version who knew how to strategize under pressure, the Navy version, the engineer version, that part was waking up. I walked into my house, dropped my keys on the counter, and went straight to the small desk in the corner of my living room. Not the one Porter owned, the one I bought with my first bonus check 15 years ago. I opened my laptop. I opened the folder labeled Personal Projects, Cal B. I opened my notebook, and I started building a file. Not a revenge file. Not yet. Clarity file. Timeline entries. Dates. Development logs. Email screenshots. Early drafts of systems that were now welded into the bones of Porter's production lines. All the pieces of a truth I'd ignored for years. I wasn't just an employee. I was the architecture of their entire manufacturing identity, and none of it had ever been legally transferred to them. Somewhere around midnight, I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. The glow of the screen made the room feel colder than it was. I stared at the growing stack of evidence and felt something sharp and unfamiliar settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was purpose. Before I went to bed, I sent myself a final reminder. Typed in bold, as if I needed to see it loud and clear. Do not leave empty-handed. Take back what's yours. At the time, I didn't realize how literal that note would become. And I definitely didn't realize how much it would cost Porter. I walked into Hudson's office the following Monday morning with the kind of calm you only get after making a decision so solid that nothing can shake it. He didn't even look up at first, just muttered something about projections and margins while scrolling through whatever spreadsheet he was pretending to understand. I placed the resignation letter on his desk. He froze. Slowly, he lifted his head, and I could see it. The brief flicker of confusion, followed by irritation, then the forced corporate smile he used for clients and board members. He said in this flat, almost bored voice that he assumed I was giving him the standard 2 weeks notice. I nodded. He skimmed the letter, not really reading it until he got to the last line where I'd written exactly where I was going next. Velocity Industrial Systems. His eyes snapped up so fast you'd think someone jerked an invisible string. He leaned back, but this time there was no laughter, no smirk. His jaw actually tightened. I could see him calculating, mentally flipping through contract clauses he didn't understand, imagining how the board would react when they found out I was walking straight to our biggest competitor. He asked if I was serious. I told him I'd accepted a VP position. I didn't mention the salary he asked anyway. I told him it was twice what Porter paid me plus profit sharing. He blinked like he'd been slapped. Then came the part I'd been expecting. He suddenly softened his tone, just like a switch flipping. He said he was sure we could work something out. He mentioned a raise, a new title, additional compensation, words he could have used years ago but didn't. I told him I appreciated the offer, but no. He asked what Velocity was giving me that Porter couldn't. I said one word, credit. He didn't get it. Of course he didn't. Hudson had never built anything in his life. Not a workflow, not a layout, not a process. He didn't understand what it meant to have your hands in the machine, to watch an idea turn into something physical. He started talking faster, offering more bonuses, perks, stock options. I reminded him that 3 days ago, he laughed at me for asking for 10%. His mouth shut instantly. I left his office without asking for permission. For the first time in 18 years, I didn't feel the urge to stay polite. And I wasn't done. The exit interview with legal was supposed to be routine. That's what Preston Vance, Porter's in-house counsel, said when he invited me into his office. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. Non-disclosure agreements, updated policies, and, hidden in the pile like a trapdoor, a non-compete clause that was absolutely not part of my original employment contract. I slid the stack back toward him. I told him I wasn't signing anything new. He shuffled, uncomfortable. He said this was standard procedure for senior engineers now. I told him it didn't apply to me. The original contract I signed nearly 2 decades ago had no such clause. He hesitated, then asked if I planned to take anything with me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the notebook. The leather looked almost black under his office lights. I opened it and pointed to the dated entries, the nights at home, the weekends on my personal laptop, the notes that clearly stated, developed off-site personal project. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply said, these systems were never acquired by Porter. No contract, no transfer, no compensation. You're using something that legally still belongs to me. Vance's face drained like someone pulled the plug. He flipped pages. His hand actually shook when he saw the dates lining up perfectly with the rollout timelines Porter bragged about in newsletters and quarterly meetings. When he hit the page that referenced the Eastwood optimization, the one currently driving nearly half our revenue, he stopped breathing for a second. He whispered that he needed to make some calls. I told him he could make all the calls he wanted. But my employment ended Friday, and I was taking my property with me. He didn't argue. My final week at Porter felt surreal, like watching the ending of a movie I knew too well. People whispered. Some stared at me like I'd betrayed the company. Others, mostly the ones who actually worked on the floor, just nodded with quiet understanding. Tommy found me by the main assembly line one morning. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and said he heard I was headed across enemy lines. I told him it wasn't personal. It was survival. He sighed and said he wished he had that option. He clapped my shoulder once, firm, and told me that whatever happened, the floor guys knew who really built the systems. That meant more to me than I let show. Maria caught me on my way to the break room later that day. She didn't ask for details. She just pressed a small rosary into my hand and said, in a soft voice, that good work follows good people. I'm not a religious man, but I kept it in my pocket anyway. I spent most of the week documenting everything, clean handoffs, training notes, manuals, parameter charts. Andy Patterson, the fresh college grad they assigned to replace me, hovered like a nervous shadow. Poor kid looked like I was handing him the keys to a jet. I told him to listen to the operators. They'd save him more than any textbook would. He nodded, writing faster than his hand could keep up. And while I did all that, I quietly backed up my personal files. Copies of the emails where I'd offered to transfer IP, Hudson's dismissals, the proposals he never bothered to acknowledge. Everything dated. Everything orderly. Everything airtight. The more I organized it, the clearer it became. Porter hadn't just underestimated me. They'd built their entire empire on something they never even bothered to own. Thursday afternoon, near the end of my final week, I had to walk Vance through the exit checklist. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I almost felt sorry for the guy. Almost. He tried one last time to ask if I'd reconsider signing the non-compete. I told him no. He asked if I intended to recreate the exact same systems at Velocity. I told him we weren't recreating anything, we were building better ones. By Friday, the factory floor felt heavier than usual. The hum of machines, the thud of presses, the rhythm of conveyors. It all felt like a heartbeat I'd lived with for half my life. I walked through the aisles one last time, touching the guardrails, nodding at familiar faces, breathing in the smell of coolant and hot steel. Maria waved at me from the inspection station, her safety glasses pushed up on her head. She told me to take care of myself. I told her the same. At 5:30 p.m., I carried a cardboard box out the front doors of Porter Manufacturing Group. My Navy mug, a few notebooks, a couple of tools that were mine long before Porter existed, and 18 years of something that felt like pride and regret mixed together. My truck started on the second try, as always. I looked at the building in the rearview mirror, and I didn't look back again. Monday at Velocity felt like walking into a different timeline, a better one. The place was bright, organized, modern. The machines didn't whine from neglect. The employees didn't move like they were waiting for the next injury report. Diana met me at reception herself. She asked if I was ready to change the industry. For the first time in a long time, I actually believed I might. But what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, was how fast things were going to unravel for Porter once their systems started to break without the man who built them. Because when you yank a load-bearing beam out of a house, the house doesn't collapse all at once. Creaks, then it cracks, then it falls. And Porter was about to learn that the hard way. The first crack came 3 weeks after I joined Velocity. I was in a conference room with my new engineering team. 8 people, sharp minds, all eager to tear apart the old systems and build something better, when my phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket. First, I ignored it. We were deep into redesigning the material flow for Velocity's automotive program, and I was in the middle of explaining why the old positioning of their quality checkpoints caused micro-delays no one had noticed. But after the 4th buzz, I stepped aside and checked my screen. For missed calls, all from Hudson, then a voicemail from him. His voice carrying a strain I'd never heard before. "Cal, we need to talk. Urgently. Please call me back. It's about Eastwood." I didn't return the call. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. Eastwood had just sent Velocity an updated order sheet that morning. A big one. Not trial runs. Not exploratory. This was a decisive shift. Their procurement team had spent 2 weeks shadowing our revamped lines, watching our efficiency spike and our defect counts drop. Porter couldn't match our numbers anymore. They couldn't even get close. Hudson was calling because he finally understood what he'd thrown away. But that wasn't the worst crack. The worst crack came 2 days later, at 6:45 in the morning, when I walked through Velocity's underground parking garage and found Hudson standing beside my truck. He looked nothing like the CEO who had laughed at me in his office. His usually perfect hair was messy. His tie was crooked. His eyes were hollow in a way that reminded me of someone who hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, he pushed off the concrete pillar and said my name like I just walked into a hospital room instead of a parking lot. I told him it was inappropriate for him to be there. He ignored that and launched straight into it. He said Porter was in trouble, serious trouble, and that I'd put hundreds of jobs at risk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply asked him how many of those jobs mattered to him 3 weeks ago when I asked for 10%. He flinched, literally flinched. He said the Eastwood expansion was supposed to be their lifeline and that my departure had undermined the entire negotiating position. I corrected him. My departure didn't undermine anything. His refusal to value the person who built the entire proposal did. Hudson stepped closer, lowering his voice like we were conspiring. He said he could triple whatever Velocity was paying me, match profit sharing, give me a C-suite title, full autonomy. Anything I wanted. I told him he taught me something valuable when he said everyone was replaceable. Then I told him I was simply proving him right. He stood there breathing hard, clenching and unclenching his fists. For a second I thought he might swing, but he didn't. His voice broke instead. He said Porter couldn't survive without the systems I took. I corrected him again. I didn't take anything that belonged to Porter. I took my work. You used it without acquiring it. He insisted no one would believe me, that the optics made me look like a corporate thief. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and opened a folder of time-stamped photos of my notebook, pages dated years before Porter implemented a single system. Then I showed him an email he'd written in 2021. Just implement it if it works. We'll handle the paperwork later. That later was about to cost him everything. He stared at the screen, pale and silent. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear. Not arrogance, not annoyance, but fear break through his mask. He stepped back, murmured something about talking to his legal team, and left. I watched him drive away. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I knew what was coming. Velocity moved fast. Faster than I expected. Within 6 weeks, our redesigned workflow was live on 3 product lines. Predictive maintenance cut downtime by a quarter. Real-time quality monitoring caught defects so early that scrap rates became almost non-existent. Workers no longer strained their backs or shoulders. Ergonomics were baked into every station. Morale climbed. Efficiency soared. And then velocity landed eastward. All of it. Not just the expansion. The entire contract. It hit Porter like a sledgehammer. Their stock fell nearly 50% in 6 weeks. Investors panicked. Suppliers demanded renegotiations. Rumors spread across industry boards. Porter had lost its engineering backbone. There was talk of a mysterious technical collapse, of internal chaos, of catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge. Not one article mentioned Hudson's laughter. But every headline was a variation of the same idea. Porter fails to protect intellectual property. Competitor surges ahead. Inside Velocity, sales celebrated. Engineering celebrated. Diana bought the entire floor coffee and donuts. But I stood in my new office and watched the news updates in silence. Because the names of the layoffs were leaked. I recognized every one of them. People I'd worked shoulder to shoulder with. People who had trusted me. People who deserved better. Tommy Rodriguez. Maria Santos. Even Preston Vance, the lawyer who tried to warn Hudson the day I left. Firing them wasn't strategic. It was desperation. Porter wasn't just bleeding. They were amputating limbs, hoping no one would notice the body collapsing. The celebration around me felt strange, loud, cheerful, triumphant. But all I could see in my mind was Tommy's tired smile when he told me the new lifts saved his back. Or Maria handing me that rosary. Or Preston flipping through my notebook with shaking hands, realizing what the company had done. Revenge had tasted sharp and clean in theory. Now it tasted heavier, darker, more complicated. That night, I sat in my office long after everyone left. I stared at the factory floor, bright, modern, alive, a place I could build something great. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt responsible. Not for Porter's collapse. Hudson earned every bit of that. But for the people who got caught in the fallout because leadership refused to listen. I was still sitting there when my phone buzzed. A message from Diana. We need to talk tomorrow. Something big. I didn't know it then, but that conversation would become the foundation of something far greater than revenge. The beginning of Operation Opportunity. Diana called me into her office the next morning. No pleasantries. No warm-up. She just turned her monitor toward me, showing the latest industry news feed. Porter Manufacturing announces 180 job cuts amid financial crisis. The article scrolled through familiar names, too familiar. Tommy, Maria, Vance, half the third shift crew. People who'd worked with me at midnight when machines jammed. People who'd burned their weekends helping me validate new workflows. People who had held up the entire production line with sheer willpower long before my designs made their jobs easier. And now they were unemployed. Diana sighed and leaned back in her chair. Velocity's having its best quarter in 8 years, she said. But this doesn't feel like a win. She wasn't wrong. The room felt too quiet, too still. Victory wasn't supposed to taste like rust. She rotated her screen back. Cal, you know that floor better than anyone. You know who's good, who's worth saving, who got screwed. Then she asked the question that changed everything. If you could rebuild a team from scratch, your team, Who would you bring? I didn't even have to think. I opened my notebook. Names, departments, skill sets, notes scribbled from years of seeing them at their best. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the table. And if we made it official? She asked. A hiring initiative? Outreach? Placement support? That's when the spark hit. Not revenge. Not victory. Responsibility. I told her we needed to do more than hire a few people. Porter was collapsing because leadership never valued their workers. Not the engineers, not the operators, not even their own legal team. Velocity could do better. Velocity needed to do better. So together we built something entirely new. Operation Opportunity. Not a PR stunt. Not a sympathy gesture. A full-scale program. We drafted a plan that afternoon. Guaranteed interviews for every displaced Porter employee with relevant skills. Immediate hiring for critical roles, pneumatic ops, quality inspection, materials flow. Partnerships with nearby plants to place workers we couldn't absorb right away. Consulting contracts for older workers nearing retirement to bridge income gaps. Paid retraining tracks for mid-career techs who needed an update to fit Velocity systems. And we did it quietly. No press releases. No victory laps. Just action. When the initiative launched, the first person through our doors was Tommy Rodriguez. He walked in wearing the same coveralls from Porter, patched and faded in places. He looked tired in a way I'd never seen on him before. When he spotted me across the lobby, he let out a shaky sigh and said, "Cal, man, I didn't know where else to go." I clapped him on the back and told him he was exactly where he should be. We hired him on the spot. I walked him through Velocity's pneumatic assist setup. My new design, not the old one. He listened the way he always had, hands resting on his hips, nodding slowly as he absorbed every detail. Within a week, he was supervising installations across the floor. 2 days after Tommy started, Maria arrived. She carried a folder of inspection logs like she thought she needed to prove herself. She didn't. I told her we'd been saving a place for someone who could spot a defect from 20 feet away. She smiled the smallest smile I'd ever seen on her and said she'd do her best. Her best redefined our quality operations in 2 months. By the end of the quarter, we'd hired 73 former Porter employees. 73 families who didn't have to wonder where their next paycheck would come from. 73 people who no longer woke up fearing the sound of a layoff email. The local papers eventually caught wind. They called it an unprecedented competitor-driven workforce redeployment strategy. I didn't care what they called it. I cared that good people got another chance. And just when I thought the past was finally settling, Vance showed up at my office unannounced. He looked thinner. His suit didn't fit as well as it used to. He sat down without waiting for permission, exhaled hard, and said he'd been fired as part of Porter's final cuts. I offered him a job before he even explained why he was there. He shook his head. "That's not why I came," he said. Then he told me what really happened after our exit interview months earlier. He'd taken my notebook, my printed emails, the development logs, everything, to Hudson that same afternoon. He told him Porter had to negotiate IP acquisition immediately or risk exposure. He warned him that using my systems without a formal transfer was dangerous. Illegal, even. Hudson waved him off. He said I wouldn't leave. He said talented engineers were a dime a dozen. He said legal didn't need to get involved. And when I resigned, when I joined Velocity and took my innovations with me, Hudson still refused to listen. Vance said the lawsuit Porter filed against me wasn't ignorance. It was deliberate. Hudson ordered it, even though he knew they would lose. He wanted to intimidate me, silence me, punish me for leaving. But the moment discovery began, everything unraveled. My documentation, my emails, the board meeting recording where Hudson bragged about using free engineering. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, scolding Porter's leadership for failing to secure their own intellectual property. Hudson's arrogance hadn't just sunk a contract. It sank the entire company. 6 months later, Porter filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The board forced Hudson to resign. Their last remaining lines were bought out by foreign suppliers. The factory floor where I spent half my life went dark. When Vance finished speaking, he looked at me with eyes that carried more regret than anger. "It wasn't you, Cal," he said quietly. "It was him. It was always him." Then he thanked me for standing my ground, for keeping records, for proving what many at Porter had suspected for years but couldn't say out loud. Before he left, I told him we were expanding our legal department. He said he'd think about it. And for the first time since I'd met him, I believed he actually would. These days, when I stand on the balcony overlooking Velocity's main production line, I see something I never saw at Porter: pride. My team is 20 engineers strong now. 15 patents hang on the wall behind my desk with my name on them. Sales are climbing. Worker injuries are near zero. Tommy runs his own training crew. Maria mentors a group of young inspectors who idolize her. And the floor hums with a rhythm I helped design, a rhythm I can feel in my chest like a second heartbeat. Sometimes an intern or new engineer asks me the same question: "When do you know it's time to stand up for yourself?" I tell them the truth. You know, it's time when staying feels smaller than leaving. When loyalty turns into self-erasure. When the people above you stop seeing the work you give and start seeing only the work they take. I tell them to document everything, protect their value, fight for their name, and never let anyone convince them that good work doesn't deserve respect. 18 years of loyalty should have meant something, but in the end, walking away meant everything.